And now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Michael Williams, Dean of the School of Business and Management at Thomas Edison University, who will interview a man who needs no introduction, or further than what I've already done, Executive Chair of Connor Strong, Board Chair of Cooper Health, and one of Camden's greatest advocates, George Norcross. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Phoebe, and welcome. It's a pleasure and a privilege for everybody to be here today. I'm going to be poking my head around this way to see folks on this side of the room. It's Giving Tuesday, and giving of your time as well as Mr. Time. It's a very special day, I think, in many ways, in the sense that if you look around you, the size of this room is really somewhat manageable. It's more of a chamber conversation than it is really an event or a talk. So in that context, I'd invite you, as we get towards the end of our conversation today, that we'll have a little time at the end of the program for some questions from the audience. And when I indicate it's time, please feel free to raise your hand. I'll acknowledge you, and you'll have an opportunity to speak to Mr. Norcross directly. It's a pleasure and a privilege. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
As Phoebe did, I also have a couple of open remarks, very small, but I think ones that really set the context for the flavor and the tone of today's conversation with George Norcross. The mantle, the context that we work in, is the purpose of the Camden County Chamber of Commerce Game Changer series is to provide chamber members with access to key personages that influence and enable both the state of New Jersey and our citizenry at large. This afternoon's conversation continues that commitment by the chamber. Deb Arthur, thank you very much. And it gives you the opportunity to speak to a leader who I think is really a little unusual relative to having access to, hence thanking him for coming. Mr. Norcross's commitment and activity in and for the state of New Jersey, locally, statewide, and also nationally, is well known and valued for over 3 decades. He has been recognized as an innovative thought leader, a business executive, a political activist and philanthropist, and a steward of a variety of numerous activities and innovations that not only benefit the state of New Jersey, but specifically Camden County and his passion and compassion for Camden County. It's with that, Phoebe had indicated some of the positions that he holds, and I'm going to go a little bit different today. The idea of accessing Mr. Norcross or any of the leaders we have on stage is to get a sense of their career trajectory, where they started, where they are. If as a youth, George identified himself as wanting to be in this stage in X numbers of years, or somewhere else, it's that kind of intimacy and nuance that I'd like to explore today with him. So as you form your questions for today, keep that in mind, keep the context which I've prescribed in mind, which may give you some insight on how we may proceed. It's a pleasure. Many of today's attendees come for just that point, to get an idea of who you are, what you do, but more so, the public side is one thing, the personal side is something else. And that integration between the two is oftentimes very public, and they see news reports, they see a variety of things. I'd like to maybe contact and identify several areas that are key moments, key milestones, key successes for you. And if we go back a few years, maybe around college, maybe even before that, and start things that probably influenced you and impressed you to do the work you do today.
Well, undoubtedly, my father influenced me greatly, as he did each of my brothers. And from a very, very young age, my dad used to bring at least 2 of us to every meeting he had on the weekends. And we'd wear our suits and bow ties, and we'd be told to sit and not speak and listen. My father was a big believer in listening and learning. And I, at a very, very young age, recall meeting most of the prominent business, political, and governmental leaders in this region, particularly those in the city of Camden back in the 60s and the early 70s. And I would say that was a great influence when I would spend time listening to people. I know it made a lot of the people in the room uncomfortable when my father would say, my 2 sons are going to sit here and listen. Today, I don't think you'd tolerate that in too many meetings. You'd wonder who these 2 little kids are sitting in a room, and you weren't quite sure what that purpose was. But I was in some rooms that had some very spirited discussions. I remember then Governor Byrne being in a room with my dad and a few other people, City Councilman Joe Dorenzo, who was the business agent for the Bricklayers Union, and the city council president for Camden, a number of the state senators from the region, and I learned some obscenities that I had not yet heard in that room that day. And Governor Byrne, at the time, took that much better than I would have taken it, or my dad certainly would have taken it, or some of the others. In fact, I think back then, Mayor Arricchetti was in the room. So they were things I remembered most of my life. But
Why did your dad have you in the room?
because my father always told us, and you should do this with your children, your children will learn by being in meetings and listening and learning and listening in particular what others have to say, and that way you're able to probably read and understand what people were thinking or doing by watching and listening to them. And I think that's very true in life. I think if you're able to ascertain what the other party is contemplating, thinking, or developing, it gives you an advantage of the circumstance you might be in, or the ability to sell them a product you might be selling, or sell them an idea or a vision, or something of that nature. So I would say those are my earliest recollections of unique things that happened in my life that influenced it.
Do you find your father still sitting on your shoulder in meetings that you're in today?
I do. I actually do. He passed away. It'll be 20 years next year, and I still go to his gravesite periodically, and I still feel a great connection, even though it's been many, many years since he's been gone. When I saw Bud taking a picture of me here, his dad and I was a young little chap, and his dad was the mayor of Pennsauken. We grew up not too many blocks from each other in Pennsauken, and I learned a lot during those years growing up there, and met a lot of people from many different walks of life.
Mm-hmm. The skills that your father either showed you, demonstrated, you intuited from him, you still carry forth today. Obviously, they've been framed and influenced and educated by your own education, by your expanding, I'll say, universe of people, the evolution of the people that you work with. How have you found over the years that has morphed relative to who you are today? Clearly, your sphere of influence is not only locally, I'll say in southern New Jersey, but throughout the state, the nation, and also federally, and at the national level. How have these skills that you've developed over time morphed and become increasingly more effective at every level that you move up?
What would I consider to be perhaps among the more significant events in my life that were positive endeavors? I would say on this campus, I probably had the single most influential event take place when I was asked to leave here in 1975. As I was walking up here, I said to the gentleman I'm with, I said, I walked this walk many a time in 1975 when I'd come into this student center, which was about half the size at the time, and I'd have breakfast with a lot of my colleagues going to class. And then they'd go to class, and I'd read the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and then I'd drift over to the courthouse because I wanted to be a lawyer in the worst way. But I didn't want to go to undergrad, and I certainly didn't want to go to law school. But I would watch trials in the courthouse. And then I would go to Philadelphia sometimes to watch some of the more famous attorneys in the region in active trials. And then I'd join everyone back here for lunch. We'd have a wonderful lunch together. They'd go to class, and then I'd return to whatever I was doing in the afternoon. And I'd go home and pretend in front of my mom and dad that I was in school all day. So then at the end of the semester, when I didn't manage to pass too many classes, I did pass some, amazingly, without showing up, without reading a book, and just taking a shot. So I was encouraged to seek vocational training, that college wasn't going to be it for me. Although in high school, and junior high in particular, I was a straight A student. I started out in Pennsauken at a Lutheran school, private school on Route 130, still there today. And I was a straight A student. And something happened during these years. My parents put me in the junior high school because they wanted us to experience all kind of kids from all walks of life. And when I went to the 7th grade, I was 2 academic years ahead. And bad things happened. I discovered girls, sports, and didn't want to study anymore. So sports, the girl thing didn't develop as well as I would have liked, but nonetheless, pretty good in sports, and my grades started to not do quite as well. So I enrolled here, and then I left after, I'm pretty sure it was my first year. And that was lucky because I ended up starting my business the following year, which I still have today, which was started back then. So I would say that was a lucky event for me. Not something I ever tell my children you want to replicate, but it was lucky. I guess I got lucky and started my business, and it developed on, and somehow I had an ability to understand business and finance from a young age.
Interesting. Let's go back to this alternative method of learning.
Mm.
You spent hours in the courthouse.
I did.
You wanted to be an attorney in the worst way and didn't want to go to law school,
Right.
go through the discipline and stuff of that, but that's also highly disciplined. Sit in a courtroom for 4 or 5, 6 hours a day. What was in it for you?
It was fascinating. I am a bit of an argumentative person, some people might say. And I enjoy challenging people in spirited debates on a variety of subjects. And I learned from watching great attorneys how they structured their arguments and discussions and interruptions, and learned from watching people how best to deal with the circumstances in a courtroom. And I learned later in watching other business events. I was always a student of any kind of business event I could watch on television or I could read about in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, or otherwise. I enjoyed strategy. I enjoyed trying to analyze a circumstance. And then perhaps in another lifetime I was a general or something, I don't know. And maybe I was in World War II. Maybe I was one of those combating what was going on, but I always enjoyed that.
Around this time, and even moving forward as your business was developing, as you're finding friends and colleagues around the world, were there 2 or 3 people that were decisive to you, that were milestone people in your life?
There are 4 people that I identify as mentors to me. Only one is still alive, but one was my father, and there were 2 other gentlemen that took me under their wings at a very young age and treated me almost as if I was their son. So I've always identified with them. I always learned an attribute from each one of them. They had a common attribute, that loyalty to your friends and your family was unconditional. Best lesson I ever learned.
That's practiced today in your work.
In my world it is. I wouldn't say it's a practice in most people's world, but I'm a bit old-fashioned. I believe in that. Always did and always do.
And that's the kind of cultural context you would tend to build in the organizations in which you work and lead.
Well, I've always, people know that I value loyalty and value that with my friends. And friends is not a loose term I use. I probably have a very limited number of friends. Friends is somebody that would, in all likelihood, give their life for you, or your family. Your family, of course, would give their life for you in virtually every case possible. And I think that loyalty is an extraordinarily important trait, honesty, integrity likewise. But those who know me know that that's something I value.
Mm-hmm.
I also value good advice and good judgment from people.
Mm-hmm.
And I do detest yes people, because I see that too much in business, too much in politics, too much in government, too much in a lot of areas. The most important friend you can have is somebody that can give you honest advice, even if you don't like that advice.
When you're looking for people to work with you, work for you, work around you, the various initiatives you engage, is that a critical interview experience you have? Do you test them in this way?
Well, I think I can pretty much judge people, and it's probably something that I am fairly good at, is judging people's attributes. I've made 1 or 2 mistakes in my business career, misjudged people, but I think from a pretty simple interview, I can size somebody up pretty well as to whether I think they are the kind of individual that has the work ethic, has the cultural values, and the good sense and intellect to be what's important. And if I'm in a discussion with someone and I think they're telling me what I want to hear, I'll sense that pretty quickly. And if that's the case, they're not generally going to be somebody that I'm going to want in my orbit.
Sure, understood. Let me move you ahead a little bit further down the line. Your business is booming, your business is growing, you're bringing people into the business, it's expanding. This interesting idea of learning in an alternative way. As you said, you're a student of everything business. You read the papers, you engage in different kinds of conversations, you integrate what you think and how you engage others. When the business really started to take off, and frankly, it may have become too big for you in the sense you have a variety of things to do, how did you enable it to grow? How did you begin the philanthropic linkage to that, the reaching out to the community process from the business?
Well, when you do a multitude of things, and I generally take on more than I should, and when you do that, there are places that have to give. But I would say the single most important thing I've learned in my life, and I think it's been learned by the different type of organizations or initiatives I've been involved with, is hire people that are smarter than you. You have to be pretty secure to do that, because most people in life are concerned about the person sitting next to them, whether they're going to try to outmaneuver them in a position they're in, or a company, or in the hierarchy of what goes on. You have to be stubborn to an extent. You have to be somebody that's very secure with who you are and what you are. But if you're going to run big enterprises and you expect to grow and build a bigger organization, you have to hire people that are smarter than you. You have to give them the kind of authority to run what they're doing, recognizing we're all going to make mistakes at times. But if you don't give people authority and you don't allow them to exercise good judgment, you're never going to build something bigger.
Yeah.
Because you can't earn enough hours in a day to run what you want to run. I have my life separated into 4 different buckets. Sometimes I joke that I have 4 full-time jobs, but I also have 4 brilliant people that act as CEOs that run these enterprises. And that's the trick to getting bigger and growing and being able to build something where you can still work hard and play hard.
Yeah, understood. Did your philanthropic interests and commitment grow from the business, or was that a combination of your own life experience and the wherewithal from the business and the civic engagement? How did that come about?
Well, they came about over a course of years, I would say. My father always told each of my brothers and I that instead of being involved in a multitude of different philanthropic or charitable efforts, pick 1, maybe 2 tops, and make a difference, versus being involved in 5 different organizations and being a contributor to 25 different ones. Pick 1 or 2 and make a difference. And 1 was easy because my father was on the board of Cooper University Hospital back in the 70s and early 80s. And that was obviously an organization that has become probably the biggest engagement of our family's interests. I joined the Cooper board, I think in 1990 or 91, so I've been on the board 28 years. My dad served for 9, I think. They had term limits back then. And I abolished term limits because I don't believe in them. So I continue to serve on the board there. So our family's been involved there in almost 40 years. So that involvement's been special to us, and it's evolved over the years. To my father, the city of Camden was everything and anything. He was born here, he was raised here, he graduated high school here, his office was here, and it mattered to him in a great way, and he instilled that upon all of us. The other endeavor I became involved with was through a dear friend when I was in my early 20s named Ed McDonald, who's a freeholder in Camden County, who had a child that unfortunately after she was born suffered severe brain damage, and he started something called the Lark School. And I got involved in the Lark School, I don't know, 25, 30 years ago. A place that he founded with others that were going to care for these children throughout their lifetime because they had such severe mental and physical incapacities that they needed some help that was not available in the way he wanted it. And I would say it's become one of the preeminent schools in the state, if not the country. And those are really the only 2 organizations that I'm actively engaged with and spend an enormous amount of time and try to make a difference.
It's clear that Camden is a passion for you, and you're compassionate to it. Your involvement with it over the years, this KIPP school, the various things that you're involved in. Can you speak a little bit about understanding this is so important to your father, and hence perhaps you and your family, what you see for Camden, how your engagement, how your philanthropic engagement and leadership will help to move this city forward?
Well, I would say a decade or so ago, I had an epiphany and realized that Cooper's long-term interests were going to be tied exclusively to the success or lack thereof of the city of Camden. And Cooper had been around at that point probably for 125 years. But things were not going real well 10, 12 years ago, and the arrow was pointed in a bad direction. And I realized at that point that if this city did not change, Cooper's long-term interests were not going to be fulfilled, and the hospital would eventually collapse. And that was my conclusion. So then, one of our senior executives, or could have been the president at the time, John Sheridan, and I sat down and said, what are we going to do to change this? And Camden is not that large that it can't be changed. I think we recognized that the political and governmental interest in the area were such that we're interested in reform and change, unlike a lot of other areas in the state of New Jersey where the political and community and governmental interest are not aligned. I felt we had an alignment of interest. And we set out and were determined to change what was going on. And today it looks like a lot of this happened somewhat easily, but it was many, many years of hard work on behalf of a lot of folks who spent a lot of time trying to build a plan and build a dream. Susan Levin is here, who's the president of the Cooper Foundation, which has largely been the organizing entity that has formulated and implemented a lot of the change that's taken place with the school system, with public safety. Some of you will remember we had a brutal battle reorganizing the police department in the city of Camden, and truth be told, we had a governor who became our partner, and if not for him, the city would be floating in the Delaware River right now. And as an active Democrat, the proud one that I am, I'm not afraid to salute a prominent Republican who was almost president of the United States that turned around and adopted this city and worked with the mayor and the county board of freeholders and those of us in leadership that he respected people who were able to execute a plan. And we were, meaning the city and the county, were something that he was prepared to invest in. And when you look at over $3 billion in investment that's either happened or is happening in this city, a lot of it's due to his leadership, his partnership with the leaders of the legislature and otherwise, which in some ways between schools and public safety are national models. When Barack Obama came to this city on his own, we didn't ask him to come here. We just got a phone call one day he was coming because he had read about the public safety initiative and how that had taken hold. The New York Times had written a variety of stories about it. And the new Renaissance School program that actually was my brother Donald's idea back when he was in the state Senate, about how to come up with a pilot program of how you could start over and create a new traditional public school system from scratch called Renaissance Schools, that we were able to put together a coalition to get the legislation through the legislature on a bipartisan basis, with then the support of the Teachers Association. Mm-hmm. Today, I don't think they're so fond of what they did. They're certainly not fond of me or Steve Sweeney anymore, but that's a story for another day. But what's going on here is absolutely remarkable.
It is remarkable.
It's beyond what anything we expected happening this quickly. The city of Camden's school children are close to 70% enrolled in Renaissance schools and charter schools in this city. It's absolutely amazing what's occurred, and what's occurred in terms of scoring, what's occurred in kids having a real alternative now in life as compared to what they had.
Exactly. Fundamental to this work, and I'll say fundamental to your work, is social change. Social change relative to what's happening here in Camden, other activities you're involved in. I'd like to move this in a slightly different direction relative to social change, business, and philanthropy. Folks in this room own businesses, work in businesses, have a variety of outlets, in fact, to enable philanthropy, to enable social change. Any comments or input you might have for others involved looking in the direction to take philanthropy in a way that can influence and enable others to act in their communities? Any advice you might give, any strategy that you might have people consider?
I would say the most important thing that I learned, and this again is from watching, absorbing what others have done over the course of my lifetime, and learning from other people's mistakes, principally. It's easy to follow what somebody did and try to replicate it. but you want to learn from mistakes. What I've seen happen in the city of Camden in particular over the years, dating back to the 60s and the 70s and even the 80s, was governmental leaders would think that they could come up with some public works project that somehow they thought would transform the city of Camden. Some of you would be aware that I was and have not been a supporter of the aquarium. Aquarium's a wonderful thing to have. I call it a $150 million fish tank that was built by some politicians in North Jersey that thought somehow it was going to revolutionize the city of Camden. And when I looked at it, I said, one block away, you can get murdered by drugs or by sex, all in the same block. Except we have a fish tank sitting here. That money should have been spent on revitalizing neighborhoods, creating better public safety, better public education. I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but you have to deal with fundamentals. You've got to start from basics. Nobody's going to invest money, including a university like Rutgers, in the city of Camden, if there's not a safety of the city. Nobody's going to invest private dollars. I mean, my partners and I are investing $250 million about 4 blocks from here. I drove down before I got here because I had not seen it for a couple months. And we're doing it because, in part, we're convinced that the city is becoming a safer place for families to be raised, people to walk the streets, and people are making investments in. So I saw a world-class amphitheater built for $35 million, a place where 25,000 people would drive in from the suburbs and see Jimmy Buffett, and 25,000 people out. That didn't do anything for somebody living at 4th and Royden. They were still in an unsafe neighborhood, or in North Camden, or South Camden, or wherever they lived. When I was a kid, I used to go to the Pine Grill at 5th and Pine. I used to go to a place called Seagulls. I used to go to a variety of great restaurants in the city. You were never concerned about your safety back then. And in order to change this city, it had to become safe. So when you look at philanthropic activities, you have to be in a position where what you're doing can be meaningful and change and affect something. You know, writing a check makes a lot of people feel good, but seeing something actually happen makes you feel a heck of a lot different. When you see kids going to school in a place where their mom and dad show up to an annual parents' night in 97 percentile participation versus 4%, and you have parents get up and are literally crying because their child is getting something they never had the ability to get, and kids who care. 3 or 4 years ago, I think it was, and I'm not even sure whether these 2 kids graduated our medical school yet. Twins coming from North Camden enrolled in the Cooper Medical School, and they were accepted on their own. They were brilliant kids that scored well on MCATs, and to see those kids go into a medical school that they never would have had in their lifetime is a very rewarding thing to see happen. So I think when you look at what goes on, being able to invest in or to put money in is a very rewarding experience. I had the fortunate time a little over a year ago to have the granddaughter of Sam Walton come to Camden. You wouldn't have noticed this woman was anything special. She came in with someone else in a Suburban. She wanted to see Camden and wanted to see the story and spent a whole day here. And this is the wealthiest family on the planet. And they invested in the city of Camden in our Renaissance School program. When you do things like that and you see meaningful change and you can tell a real story, this has actually happened. Not, this is my plan, this is my hope. I tell people a lot, I'm not interested in the hope strategy. I'm interested in the real execution. And that's what makes things happen and special. And that's how I think we've been able to attract serious donors to affecting what we do, because we've actually executed and we've performed. And that, to me, is the key to philanthropy. Investing in people that can make things happen.
Where else have you seen that in southern New Jersey? An example or two that has not only executed, but really made a difference, a tangible difference in other people's lives?
Well, you have me stumped. There are a lot of wonderful organizations that do things. I would say what's going on in the city of Camden is unprecedented in not only South Jersey, but all of New Jersey and probably Eastern Pennsylvania. I mean, in the last 6 to 7 years, what's going on here is unprecedented. You've literally seen a public school system of some size be completely recalibrated with its leadership from top to bottom. The other thing you've seen here is you've seen us go into the community and recruit the community leadership and the religious leadership. Another life lesson that I learned many years ago. Don't try to affect social change at the level we were trying without engaging the community. When you do that and you don't engage them, you inevitably fail, because there are going to be people that are going to be opposed to things unless they're engaged in it, participate in it, and are involved in it. This very room, when we started the Camden Health and Athletic Association, we invited every household in the city of Camden to show up and to tell us what they thought should happen in the new Health and Athletic Association. And it was born out of a discovery that the city of Camden did not have what I had growing up in Pennsauken, or people who grew up in Cherry Hill, or almost every community. There was a youth organization where boys and girls played softball, they played baseball, they played football, they played soccer, they played basketball, they played every sport. And it was done with community volunteers. And it wasn't just the wealthier communities of Cherry Hill and Haddonfield. One of the best youth organizations in this region is Pennsauken, still is to this day, because of parental engagement. Nothing like that existed in Camden. It used to back in the 60s, but it was disbanded. So we engaged the community. Cooper Foundation, and I recruited AmeriHealth to come in and invest in it. My family did also. We funded it with a $1 million grant. We hired professionals to come in and engage the community, invited the religious leadership to come in and be a part of it. And that's the trick. If you look at places like Newark, Jersey City, Philadelphia, what you have happen in many, many large initiatives is nothing but disruption and the can't-do club members. The people that want to tell you why you can't do something versus how you can do it. But you're never going to affect that change unless you engage the people and make them part of what goes on.
Important. Along this line of social change, from preparing for today, I understand that you enjoy presidential libraries.
That's true, because I always wanted to be president. And if Donald Trump can be president, anybody can be president.
So
Anybody.
we all have our hobbies, our avocations, our interests. Presidential libraries, all my work, I think you're the first leader I've met who has an avid interest in presidential libraries. I thought that would be both evocative and also sort of representative. Why presidential libraries besides your own desire to be president?
Well, probably whoever is not a desired one.
Translate for you.
World leader or something like that.
Yeah, they're world
Not
leaders.
just president.
There you go.
I remember going to the first presidential library. It was probably the Kennedy Library that my parents probably took me to back in the late 60s or early 70s. And it was a fascinating experience. I've been a student of history. I love studying history. History repeats itself frequently, and learning, understanding, and looking at what happens. You know, I tell people all the time, you know, I think the United States is this incredible nation that's never going to change, and it's always going to be the way it is. Well, read a little something about the Roman Empire and the English Empire. How all these things at one time, people thought the same thing, and we're a relatively young nation. What I enjoyed about, and I do enjoy about presidential libraries, is history. And going to each of these libraries, and I've been to almost every one except I have not been to the Carter Library, I've not been to Gerald Ford Library, but I think I've been to virtually every library in the country. And I spent a great deal of time. I've taken my own children to libraries because you learn about things outside of a book. There's a lot of visual learning that goes on in these libraries. And you re-experience, particularly since the 60s, things that you lived through. And you perhaps don't appreciate as much that you would at one time. So I've always enjoyed it, and that's what I do. I love going to them.
Of all the ones you've gone to, is there a favorite?
The Johnson Library is, in my opinion, by far the most spectacular library. I mean, Lyndon Johnson stole all the money to build a monument to himself at the University of Texas in Austin that's beyond any library I've seen. I mean, it's limestone, it's incredible in size and magnitude. But what's fascinating about his is that there were three major things going on during his presidency, which was civil rights, the Kennedy assassination, the Great Society, and Vietnam. And I don't think any other president has had so much going on at any one given time, and one person having that much to do with it. The most beautiful library is the Reagan Library, which is on top of a mountain in California. You know, you think you're in heaven or damn close to it when you stand up there and look out. The other thing fascinating about most of these libraries, not them all, is that the president is generally buried at the library. Most people don't realize that. Nixon's buried at his library, Reagan at his, Kennedy, of course, is not. But it's kind of emotional to stand there, like when I went to Normandy and walked the cemeteries. When you stand there and look at the stone of Richard Milhous Nixon, and you literally look at it, or Ronald Reagan, or Kennedy, when you're in Arlington, or any of these libraries, Lyndon Johnson. Johnson was buried on his ranch, not buried at the library. Harry Truman, Eisenhower. I mean, it's spooky. It's chilling because you're reliving history.
Sure. And there's a power in that. There's a transformative power. I guess that the reason I bring this up is being a student of history that you are, and given the exposure to that kind of unique, almost idiosyncratic orientation to power, to leadership, to deep wells of history. How that's informed your thinking as a leader? How these voices from the past maybe speak to you?
Well, I find it fascinating to watch videos of leaders of all walks of life, whether they be religious leaders, governmental leaders, political leaders, and even some that were not good people. I travel a fair amount, and I try to visit places of history that when you're standing there, you realize this person stood there, this person gave this speech. I took my children down to see the Eagles whip Dallas's ass a couple of years ago, and while we were there, I said, I want to take you to two places. We're going to go to the George W. Bush Library, which was beautiful but underwhelming to me, at SMU. And I wanted them to see and tour the Texas School Book Depository. And you want to talk about being spooked. When you go up on the 6th floor and you stand at the window that Lee Harvey Oswald stood at and watched what he shot from, you realize that it's unlike anything you've seen on TV. It wasn't like this skyscraper. It was 6 stories tall. It was not that far. I mean, you can see how he was precise in what he did. Now, I also think that there were others involved in that, but nonetheless, to experience what went on then is just to get a sense of reality. It's chilling and spooky, but it also brings you to a sense of history and what you see happen. And there are scores of other things I've done in my lifetime to experience real events and real things that have happened.
The realness of the events, be it presidential or be it otherwise. In your leadership and working with others, how do you transmit that realness, the execution, the doing, the hands-on grit? To your point earlier, people talk, but some people do. You do. How do you help others do?
Well, I'm not sure how I help others do, but I'll give you an example of something that I've watched and I realized. Bill Clinton grew up in Arkansas. He grew up right across from Memphis. He was a great admirer of President Kennedy. You can see where Bill Clinton, growing up, tried to emulate John Kennedy and Elvis Presley. And I'm not joking about that. His charisma literally comes from both those two people who were clearly monumental in his life and were right there. And when you study what others have done, and I wish that I utilized this more in my life, the practical aspects of what you watched. I mean, if you watch John Kennedy today on video, you think that he was on the news last night. That's how far ahead he was of his time. When you watch Ronald Reagan, phenomenal, masterful. If you didn't know and read a list of accomplishments that Richard Nixon actually accomplished without his name associated with it, you would have said he's one of the most progressive leaders of our lifetime, without a doubt. The same is true of Lyndon Johnson. So a lot of times it's form over substance. And today, a lot of people practice that art of their presentation skills. And if you're going to be in business today, you're going to be a leader in government or politics or whatever facet of life it is, given television, given the way people present things today or expect things, it's first and foremost about presentation, how you present what you do. And a lot of times, as Ronald Reagan proved to us, the manner in which you present yourself is many times more important than actually what you're presenting. Kennedy was the same. Bill Clinton was likewise. George Bush Sr. was a very poor public speaker, and it was evident what he did. Lyndon Johnson was a poor speaker. And if you're, one of the pieces of advice I've given both my children is learn how to speak, learn how to present yourself. Because whatever facet you're going to be in your life, you better be a good presenter, you better be a good speaker, because you're not getting through the door unless you learn how to present yourself.
And speaking about presidents, and to end this part of our conversation today, President Kennedy said leadership and learning are indispensable to each other. I think that might resonate with you. Does that resonate with you?
Well, it certainly does. You have to learn. I pride myself on being street smart. I'm certainly not academically smart. I have a couple brothers that are, but I'm not one of them. If you look at my family, Donald and I were the academic underachievers, but in many ways have doctorates in street smarts, whereas our other two brothers are academically very, very bright and have been very successful in their own fields. But learning, whether it be through books, learning through watching people, learning through adapting to life's lessons that you may get from your parent or parents, are immeasurably important to what goes on in life. And learning from your own mistakes and others' mistakes and focusing on that are critical. It's a lot easier for yourself to learn from someone else's mistakes because you can literally see what goes on or went on, and you can just take a look at what goes on television literally every day.
Sure.
And the last presidential campaign was a great example, probably one of the best examples of anything we'll ever see in our lifetime. Donald Trump borders on genius and insanity. And there's a very, very close line. The last 3 weeks of the campaign, he focused on what people were thinking and what was in their minds. And Hillary Clinton did not. He focused on things people were angry about and talked about how they could be improved or changed, and came up with crazy ideas like building walls that people embraced amazingly because they were so angry at what was going on. I'm a proud Democrat. I'm a conservative Democrat. I have at times told people in Washington, whether it was the Majority Leader Harry Reid or Nancy Pelosi, why is the Democrat Party supporting criminals that are here illegally? I think a path to citizenship is the right thing. But if you're a criminal, you do not belong here. And the American public doesn't want it. Why do we as a party support that? I don't understand it. And that's why the Democratic Party has not been attractive to certain elements of the working class of our country. And there are other examples of things. So it tells you how bad we are as a country, how disgusted we are with our government when we turn around and elect somebody who says, I'm going to build a wall, and that's how I'm going to keep people out. How do you accept that idea? How do a majority of certain class of women vote for Donald Trump over the first woman could have been president of the United States? It's hard to fathom and understand. But when you analyze it, you realize why. Because people are so angry and disgusted at what's going on in the country. They don't believe anybody, anytime. They think everybody in public office is a fraud. And when you turn around and turn on TV today and find out that members of Congress have been settling sexual discrimination or harassment claims, and it's a secret, it's just another example of the distrust people have in government. And it's getting worse by the day. And if you want to think, is the United States actually going to be here in this form in 20 or 30 years, you might start to think that Texas might become its own country at some point. And that's nothing to laugh at, because it's so different. When you leave where we are in this country, in the Northeast or California, it's a whole different world out there. Half my family's from Tennessee. They are nothing like we are. Nothing. They have religious respect. They, frankly, a lot nicer to each other than many of us are in the Northeast, including me. We're driven by what goes on in television and the manner in which people treat each other, and it's a different world. And to me, it's troubling. I don't think it's going to happen while I'm alive, but my children and grandchildren someday are going to face something entirely different than we're looking at today.
Thank you for that. Our time is almost up today. We have a few minutes for a few questions from our audience. I think Deb Martin has a microphone back there. So if we have 2 or 3 questions that are short, we'd be happy to entertain them. Gentleman over here to my left.
I don't need a
You're
mic.
good, Mike.
Deb, thanks. George, thanks for joining us and sharing your insights, bringing it a little bit closer to home. Is there something that still frustrates you about what's happening in Camden or southern New Jersey? What that might be, and how can we as a business and civic community potentially help?
I actually wouldn't say there's anything that frustrates me. I tell people all the time that we're fairly lucky in that once you go north of our area code, most of the people in government fight among themselves. We've managed in the last 15 years to consolidate our elected leadership to act as one. And it's simple math. We're only 28% of the state. In order for us to get our fair share, we have to be unified, and the rest of the state has to be divided, which I'm not saying anything that's a secret right now, because it's been pretty obvious throughout the last 15 years that our success in bringing resources to this region has been on the basis that we have been a unified bloc of a bipartisan nature, and we still do have Republican elected legislators in this region that work together with us, which is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. The more times you can work together, you get things done. That's happened with the last 8 years of the current administration. I wouldn't say I'm really frustrated. I mean, what frustrates me is the slow pace of government, regulations that are beyond comprehension. I remember when we were building our pavilion over here, somebody told me we couldn't get approval for some kind of design in our new rooms, and that we literally had a faucet right as you walked in the door. And I said, this is horrible. Who designed this? And they said, well, this is demanded by the Department of Health. I said, we got to put an end to this. I want these rooms to look like Four-Season hotel rooms, and us deliver world-class health care. And when you come across regulations that exist that are put on government or implemented by special interest groups that impair private industry, I mean, Jimmy the Cricket runs across a piece of land and it's tied up for the next 8 years with environmental studies. I'm all for preserving the environment. I think we should, but don't impair people's ownership of their land. Don't impair their ability to do what is permissible and appropriate. And New Jersey is far too overtaxed and far too regulated. And that's why people are moving to Pennsylvania, which is a very nice place to do business in comparison to New Jersey. And Governor Cuomo has implemented in New York tax-free zones all over the place to have people come to New York.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. The gentleman in front.
Thank you. I'm born and raised in Patterson, New Jersey, and
what you just said is absolutely correct with the political infighting. My question is, I attempted to do what you were successful with here in Camden, but I went to school. I didn't find an alternative way and open up a business. Is there a counterpart that you have in the North, or would you ever consider giving options or some sort of guidance to the North to try to bring change to the city of Patterson as you brought to the city of Camden?
Right. There's a simple answer to that, no. I'm not that smart. I benefit from the fact that most of the other people that are involved in other parts are not as gifted, let's put it that way, and we're lucky, it makes us look good.
That's right.
But it's not that difficult to figure out that you have to understand how to work with people. We're not a country of dictatorship. And as much as I'd like to do certain things on a given moment or a given time, and I can become frustrated by having a lack of patience in certain areas, if you're going to affect change, you have to engage people in it who are the constituencies. You want them to support what you're doing. They have to be reasonable. I'm gratified that the question you asked, because the last time I was in this room, some woman from Newark got up in the back and started screaming at me about what we were doing in Camden schools. It turned out she was paid by the NJA to come here and scream at me. I had no idea what the hell she was talking about. But if you learn how to execute and how to develop the mission that you're trying to accomplish, it's not that difficult. I don't think you learn it going to college or a university. I think common sense tells you almost everything you need to know. How to engage people, how to formulate public opinion, how to get people engaged in what you're doing. I mean, we took 10, 12 years ago what arguably would have been one of the worst brands, aside from the 76ers 10 years ago. The city of Camden had a terrible brand. I mean, it was horrendous. And turn that into something that people are saying today is on an upward trajectory, is something you should look at to invest private capital in, and something that's on the move. I mean, I was in Oakland 3 weeks ago. Oakland was considered murder capital of the U.S., one of the worst places you'd ever be. You cannot believe how on fire that place is. It's unbelievable what's going on there. And it's happening because San Francisco's unaffordable. And they have a rail line that runs right over to Oakland that you can be in downtown San Francisco in 7 minutes. And everything is exploded. There's certain places in the country, Austin, Texas, another incredible example of what's happening. People look towards, where is there a friendly environment? Where can I invest my private capital? Where does the government stay off my back? Where does the government properly influence what goes on, but helps facilitate a private sector? And I don't mean to sound like somebody on Fox Business, but if you want fuller employment, if you want better things to happen, you have to have a friendly business environment that creates jobs, creates a good environment, doesn't tax people into oblivion, and provides them with an ample opportunity. And that's what we've tried to do in Camden over the past 12 years. Get people to say, get involved, take a look at what's going on, there's an economic opportunity here, and try to keep government away as much as possible. Because governmental investment is needed to facilitate, not to anchor. The universities are great anchors, and that's what Camden has transformed in. When my father was a kid, it was Campbell Soup, RCA, New York Shipbuilding Company. It was a manufacturing mecca. Today, it's an eds and meds city. And that's why some of the initiatives we've announced at Cooper to help educate people, pay for their tuition, get them involved in new opportunities at Cooper and training. It's all about eds and meds. And that's what's driving not only Camden, but it's driving our whole region, Philadelphia in particular.
Exactly. With that in mind, I want to thank everyone for coming today. Again, it's been a pleasure and a privilege to have you here. Mr. George Norcross, it's been a pleasure to have you here. Thank you very much.